Hey, Urban Explorers, and welcome back to the Urbanist Lens. I'm Drew, and I'm here with Clark, ready to jump into another fascinating look at the built environment with you all.
Glad to be back.
Hey, by the way, did you see that new bike lane on 8th Avenue?
Oh, yeah. Talk about tight squeeze. Nearly got taken out by a scooter yesterday.
Oh, yeah. It's like playing real-life Frogger out there.
Seriously. But I guess it does keep things interesting.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we love about the city. Speaking of interesting things, today's discourse is all about how cities balance growth with preserving the character of those cool old buildings and neighborhoods.
Yeah. How do you modernize without erasing history? It's a tough one.
Totally. And we found this case study from Sydney, Australia, that I think really highlights this challenge.
Oh, yeah. The Crow's Nest development. I was just reading about that.
Yeah. So Crow's Nest is this neighborhood in Sydney with a ton of history. And there's this really awesome Art Deco building from the 1940s right in the middle of it all.
Beautiful building.
It was a gas company showroom.
And now, of course, the whole neighborhood is ripe for redevelopment.
Prime real estate. So what happens when developers want to build new stuff, but there's this historical gem sitting right there?
Yeah. Do you tear it down or try to work around it?
And to really get into what happened in Crow's Nest, we need to talk about zoning laws.
Ah, yes. The infamous zoning laws.
So for our urban explorers who maybe haven't encountered this concept before, can you give us a quick overview of what they are?
Sure. Zoning laws are basically the rule book for a city. They say what can be built where. You know, residential, commercial.
Industrial.
So you can't just build a skyscraper in the middle of a quiet neighborhood.
Exactly. Zoning is all about creating order and predictability, and it's also a big part of how cities protect historic buildings and neighborhoods.
Oh, right. So, like, how does that work?
Well, they can put restrictions on what changes can be made to a building, especially if it's considered historically or architecturally significant.
Okay, that makes sense. So how did all of that play out with that old gas company building in Crow's Nest? Well, the developers wanted to build a modern mixed-use space, you know, with shops and apartments, but they had this historic building to deal with. That's where the idea of adaptive reuse comes in.
Okay. Adaptive reuse.
Yeah.
You have to explain that one.
Basically, it means they incorporated the old showroom into the new design instead of demolishing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. They didn't just bulldoze it.
Nope. And it's becoming a really popular approach as cities try to find ways to blend old and new.
So they get to preserve a piece of history, but still have this modern space.
Yeah. It's a win-win.
So are you saying that zoning laws actually help make that happen?
In a way, yes. But zoning laws can be a bit of a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, they're meant to protect historic stuff, but they can also create a ton of red tape for any new development, especially when it comes to things like affordable housing.
Yeah, it's all about finding that balance. You don't want to stop growth, but you don't want to lose that character that makes a city special.
Exactly. And our research turned up some other examples that really show this tension.
Ugh. A little urban planning conflict. I love it.
Well, we came across this case in Greenwich, Connecticut, where this house from the 1880s was actually facing demolition because the owner had made some changes over the years.
Wait, so you can get in trouble for changing a historic building?
You can. It depends how significant the changes are and if they impact the historical integrity.
I guess that makes sense. Seems like it could get pretty subjective, though. What other examples did you find?
Oh, we also read about this thing in New South Wales, Australia. They call it heritage creep. Basically, more and more things are getting added to these heritage registers. Even things like gutters.
Gutters.
Yeah. Sounds a little crazy.
A little bit.
But some people are arguing that it's actually being used to block housing developments.
So they're trying to preserve every little detail.
Pretty much. It raises the question of where do you draw the line, what's worth saving, and what's not.
Yeah, a tough question. So we've got these really strict rules in Greenwich, potential overreach in New South Wales. What about that St. Helena Island example?
Oh, right. St. Helena Island is off the coast of South Carolina. It's known for this unique Gullah Geechee culture. There was a proposal to build a golf course there, which caused a lot of controversy.
Yeah. Development versus preserving culture?
Exactly. Some people saw the golf course as a way to boost the island's economy, but others were worried that it would destroy what makes St. Helena Island so special.
It's a tough situation for sure. So it seems like zoning laws, even though they're supposed to be helpful, can sometimes cause more problems than they solve.
Definitely presents some unique challenges. I think it comes down to having really clear guidelines and involving the community, so the laws are applied fairly and thoughtfully.
That's a good point about community involvement. It can't just be decisions made by developers and city officials.
Absolutely. Everyone needs to be at the table.
Yeah.
Residents, developers, city planners, to make sure everyone feels heard and that the outcome benefits the whole community.
So back to Crow's Nest. How do they deal with all of these zoning issues? Did they come up with a compromise that worked?
They did. And this is where things get interesting. They used something called heritage conservation incentives.
Heritage conservation incentives. What are those?
It's like a trade-off. The city was willing to bend the zoning rules a bit in exchange for the developer preserving the Art Deco building.
Like a reward for doing the right thing?
Exactly. They allowed a bit more height and density than zoning would normally permit, and in return they got this amazing piece of architecture protected. From what I read, it seems to have worked out pretty well. The Crow's Nest development is a really cool blend of old and new, with that restored Art Deco building right in the center.
I love that. It seems like a great model for other cities. But was everyone happy with the compromise? There had to be some people who weren't thrilled.
You know, that's always the question. These projects are so complex, and there are always going to be different opinions.
Like maybe some residents thought the new building was too tall, or that it didn't fit in with the neighborhood.
That's definitely possible. That's why it's so important to get the community involved early on. You need residents, developers, city planners, all talking to each other, working out their concerns, to try and find solutions that work for as many people as possible.
Couldn't agree more. Community engagement is key. But I think this Crow's Nest case really highlights this bigger question we see in cities all over the world. How do we modernize our cities while still protecting the things that make them unique and historically important?
It's a balancing act for sure.
Exactly. So what are some of the big takeaways here? What can we learn from this Crow's Nest example?
Well, I think the biggest one is that adaptive reuse is a really powerful tool. It's a creative way to give new life to old buildings and neighborhoods while still preserving their history.
I'm with you there, tearing everything down and starting over. It just feels so wasteful.
Absolutely. Another big takeaway is that we need clearer guidelines when it comes to zoning laws. The more transparent and understandable those rules are, the easier it will be for developers and communities to work together and to avoid these conflicts that come up. And of course, involving the community from the beginning is so important. When people feel like they have a voice, it leads to better outcomes for everyone.
You're preaching to the choir here. We can't leave these decisions just to developers and city officials. The people who live in these cities need a say too.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole topic so interesting. It's not just about buildings and regulations. It's about people. It's about how we want our cities to change, what we value, and how we balance the needs of today with the history of the past.
Well said. You know, it's funny. Think about that close call you had on the subway the other day.
Oh, come on, not that again.
I know. But it just got me thinking. Even something as simple as a crowded subway platform, it's all part of this bigger conversation about how we shape our cities.
It really is. I think that's a perfect transition to our final thoughts for our listeners.
Great point. So before we wrap up this discourse on balancing progress and preservation, we want to hear from you.
Yes, we want to hear your thoughts.
How do you feel about historic preservation in your own city? Are there buildings or neighborhoods that you think should be protected? What do you think about adaptive reuse? Tell us your stories. Share them with us on social media. Leave us a comment.
And be sure to tune in next time when we continue our exploration of the urban world.
Until then,
Yeah.
keep exploring. You know, it's funny thinking back to that heritage creep thing.
Oh, yeah. The gutters.
It really is interesting to think about. On the one hand, I totally get wanting to preserve the things that make a city unique. But when does it go too far?
Right.
When does preservation actually get in the way of progress? Like when we need more housing, for example.
It's the big question, isn't it? I don't think there's a simple answer. It really depends on the specific situation. And I think it shows that just relying on zoning laws to decide what to preserve can be tricky.
Oh, so?
Well, zoning laws can be a bit too rigid sometimes.
In what way?
It's all about drawing lines on a map and saying this is historic and this isn't. But history isn't always so black and white.
Yeah, you're right. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Exactly. And I think that Crow's Nest example shows that there are other ways to think about preservation, like those heritage conservation incentives. It's a system where developers are actually encouraged to save historic parts of buildings.
It's a much more flexible approach.
Yeah, it's about collaboration and finding creative solutions.
Not just saying no to everything new.
Exactly. And to me, this whole thing connects to this bigger question about what we value in our cities. Is it more important to keep every tiny detail of the past, or to make sure cities are affordable and livable for everyone today?
It's a tough question, and there probably isn't one right answer. It's about finding that middle ground.
Where we can honor our history without stopping progress altogether.
Exactly.
And I think it comes down to communication, getting everyone involved, residents, developers, city planners, and having those open and honest conversations about the kind of city we want to create together.
I think that's a great place to wrap things up. So as always, we want to hear from you, our urban explorers. What are your thoughts on balancing progress and preservation in your cities?
Let us know. Share your ideas on social media or leave us a comment.
And be sure to join us next time for another deep dive into the world of urban planning and design.
See you then.
Happy exploring, everyone.